Elections and Politics Judicial Endorsements. Our final interview is for the Justice of the Peace, North Las Vegas Township Department 1. The way we're going to do our interview, we're going to first give each of you a minute to introduce yourself, a bio to our panel. Then we're going to have questions for you, and all your questions, when you have an answer, we're going to limit it to a 1 minute answer. We have a timekeeper, so when you hear the little bell on his phone, that means you have 10 seconds left, and please try and wrap it up, because we do have a lot of panel members and we have a lot of questions. And now we have 4 up here, which is the largest group we've had, so it's going to take a little bit longer to get through this. So with that, we'll start with Kalani, since he's sitting right here right next to me, and you go ahead and please turn on your microphone and speak into the mic, and tell us about yourself.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having us here. My name is Kalani Hoo. I'm an attorney here in Las Vegas, Nevada. This is my 14th year of practice. I started my own law firm in 2006 with a partner, so it's Ewing and Hoo is my law firm. I practice primarily in criminal as well as civil matters. For the last little over a year now, I've been sitting as a pro tem judge in North Las Vegas Justice Court, sitting for both all departments 1, 2, and 3. I've also been the pro bono legal advocate for the United States Veterans Initiative since 2009, or US Vets as the facility is called. I'm a father of 2. I lived in North Las Vegas. My kids are educated there. My wife is a school teacher for the Clark County School District. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Michelle Anthony. I am currently a Deputy District Attorney with the Clark County DA's office. I've been there for a little over 5 years. I originally began my career as a middle school science teacher. I taught for 4 years. I wanted to become the best teacher that I could be for the students, and as a result, I earned my Master's of Science Education. I became one of the science teachers that the school went to, and I ended up having all of the special education students in my classroom. As a result of that, I also needed to bring in money into the school because we didn't have enough resources at the time. So I helped write a middle school demonstration grant, and I brought $200,000 to my school. After that, I realized that I wanted to go to law school to become a special education attorney. I went to law school. I did an internship at the district attorney's office, and then I joined the district attorney's office here. Thank you.
My name is Will Ewing, and I've been a practicing lawyer in Las Vegas for 22 years. I have lived in North Las Vegas for 22 years. The majority of my career has been with the Clark County Public Defender's Office, where I've done a variety of things. I spent about 10 years doing exclusively death penalty defense work and other homicides. I ran that team for about 5 years. For the last 6 years, I've been training and supervising a team of lawyers within the Clark County Public Defender's Office. I've had opportunity to practice all over Southern Nevada in all the different courtrooms and watching all the different judges and the way they handle themselves. I've lived in North Las Vegas, like I said, for 22 years, and I've always tried to be involved in civic endeavors out there. Everything from being a Little League baseball coach to being a scout leader. I've served on advisory committees. I'm currently a member of the North Las Vegas Planning Commission, and I'm excited for this opportunity to serve as a North Las Vegas Justice Court judge. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan MacArthur. Some of you may recognize me from 2008 when I ran for a similar position in North Las Vegas. Missed it by 8%. I am the local boy that made good. I'm from Las Vegas and have lived in and outside of North Las Vegas for the past 38 years. I came to Las Vegas Valley when I was 1. I went to Clark High School for high school. I went to Clark High School for high school. I went to UNLV for undergraduate. I didn't have a law school option here locally, so I went back to Virginia for Washington and Lee University, graduated in '99. Between high school and undergraduate, I was also in the Army for the first Gulf War, 108th Intel Battalion, but that is actually out of Korea, not in the Middle East. Honorably discharged. I have worked as a criminal defense attorney for the past 13 years, doing approximately 50 felony trials over that period of time. I'm running for judge in North Las Vegas to introduce sensitivity and a degree of diversity to a bench that has otherwise been rather columnar.
Thank you. And with that, we'll go ahead and move right over to our panel. Once again, starting with Melody.
Good afternoon. Thank you for attending. I guess my first question is going to be to Mr. MacArthur. Can you explain sensitivity on the bench?
Yes, it's become sort of a popular mantra in local electoral politics to sort of affiliate yourself with saying that, you know, I'm going to treat everybody the exact same. And that, I guess, passes superficial muster, but you need to recognize that true justice requires an individual to recognize who are the parties in front of him, what are the facts specific to this instance, and how can I tailor justice or sentencing to have greatest effect here. For example, recognizing that a first-time convicted person, a $500 fine, if he makes $120,000 a year, is not the same as a $500 fine for the same type of individual if they only make $13,000, $14,000 a year and are intermittently employed. Being able to tailor the outcome in order to get the attention and accountability from the people who are in front of you, I think, is more essential.
For the rest of our members, I guess I'd like to go to the veterans support calendar. How would you create and implement and document a veteran support calendar in your program? And you can also answer that myself, since I apologize. But no, I'd like to start with Mr. Who.
Okay. Thank you. Regarding Veterans Court, if you're talking about what has been put forth in the statutes versus what's practical for the North Las Vegas Justice Court, I'm not sure if that's the best location for it. If you're talking about a court actually within the walls of the North Las Vegas Justice Court. My understanding is the way that it works now is that there is contact made between the VA and the court when there are subjects that are of veteran status. And that's important to know because the court's now required to ask that about people who enter the court, whether they are of veteran status and whether they qualify for I think it's
Veterans calendar.
1676A. I can't remember the exact statute number. Whether they qualify for placement within a veterans court. And that's, the numbers I don't think are there in North Las Vegas Justice Court, unlike Las Vegas Justice Court or Henderson or otherwise. Whether that means referral from that court to now, which is Judge Tobias's court, that's probably the most likely way to deal with them.
Great.
I'm sorry.
Currently, I'm assigned out to North Las Vegas. I've been assigned out there for at least 3 of the years that I've been practicing. I appear in justice court all of the time. On the door of the courtrooms, there's a sign asking them, please notify the bailiff or the marshal whether or not you are a veteran. While I've been out there, I have never seen anybody inform the court that, yes, I'm a veteran. I haven't seen any referrals happening. So maybe it's time that we start, making sure that we not only have the sign on the board, but we also, on the door, that we also start to ask them, to make sure that we really are hitting all of the veterans, and whether or not, there are ways to help them with the VAs and have them coming into the court system. I think that even if you have one person, you can help that one person at the end of your calendar. You can make the connections with the VA, and you may not have to refer them down to Las Vegas. One person is, we can help as well. Thank you.
I think that it's good that veterans are getting a little bit of an increased emphasis, increased attention in the justice court system because of the sacrifice they've made as well as some of the things that they're enduring because of experience they've had while they've served. I think that you're going to get a little bit of duplication in answers here because through the Public Defender's Office we are involved in Veterans Court through Judge Tobias's court. We think it's a great program, not utilized enough yet. It needs to be kind of in the forefront, and people need to be educated about it. Not only people charged with crimes, but defense attorneys and prosecutors, and so I think it's something that needs to grow a lot. I think that right now it's a small enough number where having Judge Tobias handle the matter and having referrals from North Las Vegas is effective. If it grows, then we have to look at expanding it to other courtrooms.
The Veterans Court, as you know it, was established by the Nevada legislature in NRS 176A-280 back in 2009. In that, the legislature recognized that Nevada, having Nellis Air Force Base in it, especially the test site, and so many former active service members, had a higher population of veterans than most places. And in appreciation of their service and recognizes of the challenges that they faced, came up with a system by which we can divert veterans, preferably, out of the incarceration or conviction area and help preserve their lack of record. The problem with the statute is that it does not go far enough. Most people are not aware that it only applies to individuals who are being adjudicated of a misdemeanor. not a felony. Therefore, if you are charged with a felony and you cannot obtain a misdemeanor adjudication from the district attorney, then you're not eligible. Secondly, you have to show that you either have a drug addiction or PTSD, and lastly, that it would do you some good. We have to give the judges more discretion on when it can be applied and remove the district attorney from the discretionary position of being able to say whether or not an individual qualified.
You're here.
Thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate you all being here. We all know that the war on drugs, which began back in the 1990s, has marginally been successful, I guess, but has resulted in overcrowding all our prisons. The philosophy of rehabilitation versus incarceration, what is your feeling on the importance of rehabilitation? And you can start with Mr. Hoo and just work your way down. Thank you.
I'm willing to share, but I'll start with this one. Okay, rehabilitation I think is very important. I learned a lot while working, even within the veterans context, but just also as a private practitioner. We deal with a number of different people. One of the things that I think is important to recognize is there's a difference between people who commit crimes and there are those that are just predisposed for preying on others, violent crimes, that type of thing. Drugs are an important thing. Unfortunately, I think I disagree with the war on drugs in terms of being that effective, because they make it here or it's shipped in or brought in here through our borders, and the drugs are here and they don't stop coming, unfortunately. There are those that use, there are those that sell. I think when it comes to people with limited or no criminal record and they have an issue of abuse or use, I think treatment is a viable option for them, because incarceration I don't think is an answer to call abuse. Unfortunately, we do have drugs within the walls of our detention centers and our prisons. So the problem doesn't go away simply by incarceration.
Every case needs to be looked at individually, each person, each case, and all of the facts of each case. When we're looking at whether somebody can be rehabilitated or not, I think it's something that needs to deal with an evaluation. Somebody that's educated, somebody that knows whether there is an addiction there or not, and whether that addiction is something that needs to be treated. I think when a defense attorney or somebody like myself as a district attorney are looking at a case and saying whether somebody needs drug treatment or not, I don't know that we are the people that have the most knowledge in order to make that assessment. So I do think that there are people that need assessments, and people with more education and are more familiar with that need to make those decisions. And there needs to be more of a process regarding evaluation on whether somebody can be rehabilitated or not.
Drugs are available in prisons, drugs are available on the streets, drugs are available everywhere. It's a big problem. I think the thing that deserves the most attention with our veterans is getting them off the street, getting them into a situation where they can be rehabilitated, where they can be treated. I had an opportunity about 6 months ago to supervise a project where we went into the Radcliffe House and furnished all the apartments for U.S. vets. And it was really a cool experience because we didn't just give them a check, but we got families involved, and families went in and they painted and they brought in furniture and they did things to get those homes ready to make them a home, to get these men and women off the street. And the Radcliffe House, U.S. Vets is wonderful because there's requirements to live there. They have counseling on site. You have to comply with their rules in order to stay there. We got to get them off the streets and get them away from the drugs, because drugs aren't going away. Thank you.
I took the question to ask about rehabilitation generally and not just in the parlance of drug addiction. I believe that we should regard rehabilitability as a given unless an individual has shown you proof that they are otherwise not amenable to it. In other words, the best way to predict future behavior might be based on past behavior. A person who has no prior criminal conviction probably deserves our best efforts. If we're going to spend our money somewhere to try to stem the problem, we want to start with them, and we don't want to make the check small. However, if that opportunity, if it's an honest opportunity and sincerely engaged in, has not worked, at that point, incarceration becomes a much more likely option. So I think of rehabilitation as something that should be offered to first-timers in most senses, unless they are somehow unqualified because of disturbing violence or particular reckless abandon.
Thank you for all being here. All of you obviously are practicing attorneys and have a lot of experience doing that. My question to each of you is the same, and that is, what aspect of your professional experience or aspects do you feel gives you somewhat of a unique view of the world, a unique qualification, a different take on the defendant or a party in front of you that will allow you to be fair and equitable and wise?
Want to go the other direction this time?
Thank you. My unique perspective probably comes from my background. I'm solidly middle class or working class. I lived in North Las Vegas, but before I lived in North Las Vegas, I actually lived in a rather nice community where there were doctors and lawyers, and it was primarily white. When I moved to North Las Vegas, the culture changed. I got stopped by the police more, not necessarily mistreated, but just looked over a lot more closely. I've always been able to look from the outside in. I've never been the traditionalist. I'm not a mainstream thinker. And as a criminal defense attorney, I've frequently had to make arguments that, while I knew they were right constitutionally, weren't going to be well received, just by the common listener. A lot of people don't like crime, or they don't like people that are accused of committing crimes. And I've routinely had to take a position that was either unpopular or controversial. And I've always stood my ground on those because I have a good moral compass as to what I think is right. I will continue to do that as a judge, and I don't particularly care for judges that change their answers based on whether it's an election year or not.
Sometimes I feel like being a career public defender is something I have to overcome, and I think that's very unfair. I think as a career public defender, I've had an opportunity to see a lot of people in a lot of bad situations for a lot of different reasons. I did death penalty defense work for 10 years, and when I did that kind of work, my job was to dig into their backgrounds and try to figure out what went wrong, try to figure out how they got where they got to where they were involved in these kinds of cases. So I've had that perspective, but I'm also a citizen of North Las Vegas. I've raised my children there. They all went to public school. They're all adults now. I've got grandchildren. I want safe streets. I want a strong police force. I want people to be held accountable for their actions. But I have that unique perspective of seeing the other side of it as well, which I think provides me with the perspective that you need to have to be a good judge.
As a deputy district attorney, I looked at every single case, and as I look at every case, I make sure that I look at the victim and what happened to the victim and how to effectuate, justice for the victim and for our community, and that's how I look at cases, what is right. Additionally, as being a middle school teacher, that involves, the same thing, looking at people, looking at each individual perspective and making sure that our community is safe based on the decisions we make.
Like Will, my family lives in North Las Vegas. My children attend public school there now. I'm a citizen and a resident of North Las Vegas. I also serve, as I mentioned before, as a pro tem judge in North Las Vegas, and from 2001 to about 2007, my office was assigned as a track attorney to the North Las Vegas Justice Court, Department 2. So what I've been representing citizens as well as residents of the North Las Vegas area for quite some time. This court is tailored to North Las Vegas as well as the residents thereof. I think what distinguishes me is that I've represented people and had firsthand interaction with those that live within that community. I currently serve as a pro tem judge there, so I see probably as opposed of a view of the citizens as can be while sitting on the bench as well as advocating for those behind it. So I think I'm uniquely qualified in that perspective.
And the mic, please, have it on. Major. No, major.
My question to you is this. What is the role of fairness versus following the law? When we have cases right now, we have a lot of these cases right now in this community where people are being evicted from their homes for not paying the rent or not paying their mortgage. Is it the role of the judge to consider the fairness of the issue or just follow the law?
Would you like to start? I think all of us here have to say that our ultimate responsibility is to follow the law, but within the law there's discretion. There's different things that you can do. You mentioned specifically evictions, and the eviction laws are pretty specific about what needs to happen. So you can hold landlords to a certain level of responsibility there. You can also put yourself in a position where you can educate people about social services that are available if they're on the verge of being evicted. You can be a source of information. You can also be a voice of reason to landlords to help them perhaps make some concessions, give some additional time to people. So although you do have to follow the law, and I would be committed to following the law, there is opportunity to be proactive, to help people that are in trouble, so that they can know what's out there to help them improve their situation.
I'm going to echo Will's sentiment. Matter of fact, we agree on a lot of things. I hate running against Will because he's a really great guy. Helped get me in the PD's office back in the day. But what I'd add to that is that there's a lot of discretion in law. I mean, there has to be separation of powers. A judge first recognizes that he's not there to legislate, he's not there to execute. But within the boundaries of the confines of the law, there are always gray areas. And the reason I'm echoing what Will said, it's a good example with regard to sentencing, or with regard to landlords, being able to give the parties an opportunity to achieve an outcome that's ideal for everyone. Briefly, I was also a pro tem judge up in North Las Vegas before Kalani. I'm no longer there, he is. And I also did it in municipal court. And we had instances where people would come in and the landlord and the tenants actually got along. It's just the money wasn't being paid. So you pull them aside and you say, hey, can they keep the deposit and give you this amount of money in exchange for this amount of time to move out, and both of them leave happy. That kind of creativity can only benefit the community.
As part of the duties of the Justice of the Peace, especially in North Las Vegas Justice Court, there's the criminal calendar, which we've all talked about. There's also a civil calendar. What we deal with there are small claims, eviction matters, unlawful detainer matters, so just basically possessory interest within properties or residences, whether it be renting or buying. One of the things that I tend to set for hearings, as opposed to summarily disposing of, are matters when you can look case by case and see how each case varies. One of the things that you can see is this a person that's rented for a month, not paid, moved to the next apartment, whether they have a history at that court renting over and over, basically living free by bouncing around. Or did they have a relationship with this landlord for, say, I had one that was a person living at this one residence for 6 years. So I had to set it for a hearing, have them come in, talk to them about what it was. Obviously, it's economy-based, financially based. And those are the kinds of things, obviously, that you can use your discretion. The landlord, and I asked the landlord, is this someone you really want to get rid of after having a good track record of 6 years? And these are the things that, using discretion, that we would have, be able to work with both parties and come to some kind of reasonable resolution.
Thank you.
Oh,
Excuse me.
I'm just going to keep it brief. You have to follow the law, but you can take the time to get to know the individuals and to talk to each of them and figure out what the issue is and see if you can help solve the issue while following the law. But taking the time to talk to people and figuring out what the issues are usually helps to solve the process and the problem.
Greetings, thanks for being here. I'm Travis Berrick, an attorney here in town. Ms. Anthony, what's the amount of time that officers can hold somebody in a DUI checkpoint?
Oh boy. I believe it's 2 hours.
Fair enough. Mr. Ewing, are you aware that the DNA petition filed in district court is not an appealable order?
I'm not sure I understood that question.
When a prisoner files a DNA petition for DNA testing in the district court, and the district judge denies it, the Supreme Court has ruled that that's not an appealable order. How does that make you feel?
I'll tell you how it makes me feel. I did this work for 10 years, and there's a phrase out there called procedural default, which is just killing me. And that is, it's saying that if you have a viable issue, there can be an end to that issue before it's fully adjudicated, and I hate that. I hate the thought that I could have done something wrong as a defense attorney, but if someone files a petition 1 day late, that can never be addressed under that term of procedural default. So it bothers me a lot that things cannot be reviewed. I think that we live in a system where we want to make justice as perfect as we can. And what creates perfect justice is judicial review. So that bothers me a lot.
Thank you. Mr. MacArthur, please instruct me as to how North Las Vegas handles officer-involved shootings.
Not sufficiently well. Unfortunately, and this isn't to say that I think that there's something wrong with the entire department. But there's a presumption that if there's a shooting, that it was somehow compelled. And there's a lack of accountability or transparency on how those are investigated. I think that in order to have the trust of the community, there has to be that transparency. People have to be assured that an unusually high number of fatalities are actually just brought on by an unusually high number of incidents in which the police officer was provoked. But without that review and without some sort of enforcement mechanism, I'm not saying that we should treat police officers like defendants, but still, to just leave it to a system where they're being questioned by the prosecutor, very softball questions, they have a very cordial relationship, working relationship they have every day, doesn't enforce that kind of integrity that I'm talking about.
Thank you. Last one. Mr. Hoo, you get to pick which one of those three questions you want to answer.
I think the detention time duration is 1 hour.
Which is also.
Yeah. Yeah. How about 10 seconds?
So many good questions to ask, and yeah, so many good questions to ask, and it's hard to decide. I would like to ask Mr. Hoo, please. I understand that you successfully defended a client charged with open murder and the use of a deadly weapon in robbery, and that this client was found not guilty on all counts. As briefly as you can you please explain the circumstances of that?
It was 2007, it's the State v. Taylor. In fact, I just saw him in court for a traffic matter 4 days ago. Basically, this young man was 18 at the time. He was with a 16-year-old who had a sawed-off .22 rifle hidden in the sleeve of his jacket. There was a repairman that came to a facility. The 16-year-old walked over to the repairman and asked him for money. The guy said no. He started grabbing his wallet. He fought back. My client was standing there without a weapon, without being aggressive. The man struck the younger man. The young man said, "You shouldn't have hit me," pulled out a gun and shot him, and he was dead. And they charged him and 2 others that were standing near him with the open murder. So we have jury instructions, mere presence, mere association. These are well-established rules of law, and that was the basis. He didn't shoot, he didn't participate, he sort of stood there, but he was, because of association, he was charged.
Thank you. And then if it's all right, I'll just pose the one question to the rest of the 3 panel members, and this has to do with recent findings Attorney General Holder had in the mortgage securities fraud investigations, where actions were considered unethical but not necessarily illegal. Nonetheless, these actions resulted in the losses of some, I think it was $700 or $800 million across the nation, and the various homeowner losses and whatnot. So, as a judge, how would you pursue justice for your client in this case? If the law says the criminal did not break the law, but still this was the end result, how would you deal with that? Just briefly, we'll start over here.
I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Okay, so Attorney General Holder found in the mortgage securities fraud investigations that the actions of those involved were definitely unethical, and they definitely resulted in losses of the homeowners from across the nation, and it was something like $700 or $800 million in losses. However, although they were unethical, they weren't illegal actions, and therefore could not be pursued in a court of law. How would you go about seeking justice for your clients in that case, or not your client in this case, but the person who's bringing the case to court? If it's not against the law, but it was still unethical, and if the end result was grand theft.
Okay, so if I'm understanding the question right, and you're asking me as if I were a sitting judge at the time? Okay, so if somebody had brought a case before me, and that if it's not against the law, even though there were losses, then as a criminal judge, then I would have to dismiss the case. I mean, you can't continue and you can't convict somebody that if it's not illegal. I mean, that's what I would have to do, and unfortunately, sometimes there's damages that result.
I think the question was, I don't mean to interject, but the judge in that case had to accept the settlement agreement between the U.S. Attorney and B of A and the other banks. as to whether or not there was criminal activity or just took the settlement agreement of 800 for the payoff. So is that more narrow it? As a judge, would you accept that settlement agreement?
Yeah, like how do you
Versus
keep,
letting him walk away from $800 million in criminal?
yeah, how do you keep that from happening again? If somebody walks into your house and steals $700 and then you take them to court and they're made to pay you back 26 cents, what's to keep them from doing that again?
I'm sorry, I don't think that I understand, as a judge, I'm not sure what you're asking me, so I can't answer the question. I think I've answered what I understand, but I'm not understanding the entire question.
Yeah. That's
Sorry.
Well, Justice Court judges are judges of limited jurisdiction. The questions you're posing would be probably more appropriate to ask to a district court judge. But as a judge, you may have the opportunity to supervise or participate in settlement conferences between parties. And you have an opportunity there to say things that you think may be helpful, to sway things one way or another. You also have the opportunity to in a case that's not criminal, but where there's perhaps ethical issues, you have the opportunity to encourage civil action. If the only issue is this is no longer criminal. But judges have to follow the law, which is difficult. We've all seen movies like the old Star Chamber movie, where sometimes judges have to make difficult decisions on search and seizure issues and suppression of evidence issues, because bad things may happen, but yet you're in that position where you have to follow the law, and I would do that.
Let me be clear about something. Eric Holder is merely the top law enforcement official of the federal government. His jurisdiction does not extend to state or county government. One of the questions that I was listening to the previous two judges that you were interviewing, or at least Ms. Chalani and the judge, that they didn't note was that justice and district court judges actually have the discretion to order investigation and prosecution where they believe that probable cause exists. It's not simply the opinion of the prosecutor. In this instance, we have a district attorney's office of the county that would act in the same capacity as Eric Holder. Now, if you have a good faith belief that this is criminal conduct, and they are prosecutable under your own statutes in your own jurisdiction, a judge can order that they be investigated and that they be prosecuted. In this instance, that's what I think should have been done. And frequently, even in government, policy is viral, right? An example in 10 seconds. Certain attorneys generals around the country have challenged the Affordable Health Care Act, and then more and more and more and more and did it. The same thing would happen, whether you agree with that issue or not, if judges were to individually and local levels prosecute that fraud.
What I think your question, at least the way I'm interpreting it, it was an inquiry as to whether the banks were culpable for the mortgage crisis, as we call it. I'm not sure if is that what I'm asking?
Essentially, it's the knowing, willing, unethical behavior of these individuals concerned, which resulted in substantial losses to homeowners across the nation and brought the rest of us down to our knees economically.
But the lenders, I think, is what you were
Right,
referring to.
but there's no law that says they weren't allowed to roll these securities together and sell them as some sort of investment vehicle, not just, here locally in the United States, but also abroad. And just because there was no law saying that they couldn't do that, that doesn't mean that they didn't have the common sense as CEOs of banks and financial lending institutions not to have taken such irresponsible actions in the first place. They knowingly and willingly did that, and as a result, you have these losses. And how is that fair to the people who've incurred these losses? If you could just say, well, the findings are that their activities were unethical but not illegal.
Well,
There has to be some justice.
Sure, and I think unfortunately, I borrow from all three people that have said something here. I think if you don't find, as a homeowner, I think it's the stance you're talking about, or as an investor who lost their investment, I think there are two avenues. Obviously, you are a victim or a witness in a criminal prosecution, but you can also be a plaintiff in a civil lawsuit in trying to recoup your losses if there's a basis for it. If there's a finding that there's unscrupulous practices, the burden of proof is obviously much lower in a civil standpoint. Not sure if that answers what I'm saying.
Yeah, no.
I want to thank all four of you for coming in to answer these questions. Mine is more of a perceptional question. perception's reality for most people, whether it's actual reality or not, that's just the way it is. All four of you can answer this question. What would you say to those individuals who believe that prosecutors tend to be tougher on crime and tougher judges, and defense attorneys tend to be softer on crime and not as willing to punish lawbreakers?
We've had this Anthony go first.
Yeah, Michelle.
All right, so obviously it's perceptions, and you can't lump all prosecutors into the same group, and you can't lump all defense attorneys into the same group. I mean, we have 3 different defense attorneys here, and each of them have different views. That's what I would say to that. Everybody has their own individual opinions, and even though you are stereotyped as a prosecutor, you might not be the hardest on crime. And even though you might be stereotyped as a defense attorney, you might be harder on crime than some prosecutors. So I think, again, it's stereotypes, and you just look at each person individually.
All right, I'll go ahead.
I've always been bothered by the mantra that I'm going to run my election on the campaign that I'm going to be tough on crime. Because every case that I have ever had has a life of its own. They're not tried in a vacuum. Every case is very unique and very individual, and that's the way I would look at it as a judge. I mentioned earlier that I hate the fact that I have to overcome this public defender stigma. Why would I be any less desiring of having a safe neighborhood than someone who's a district attorney? Why would I be any less desiring of having people held accountable for criminal activity than a district attorney? I will say, though, that because of what I have done, I see alternatives that may work better for society than being tough on crime. I see diversion programs that may actually protect the citizens of the city better than being tough on crime. So that's my answer to that question.
Good.
All right, and it's being a private defense attorney as long as I have, and I'm sure my brethren down there may or may not disagree, but there are other judges out there that we know as examples that came from the public defender's office who were extremely harsh sentencers. There are district court judges that took the bench directly from the DA's office who it was very surprising just how often you would get probation. So unfortunately, the perception is not true, and I would echo some of the sentiments made by others on the panel that each case is different. Each person is different. There are factors to consider which are very important, which guide. I think incarceration is important for those that there's no other alternative. Treatment, of course, as we talked about in the first round of questioning, I think is very important because you want to solve problems, and the problems would be if there's addictions, if there are other things. If you want to avoid having these people come back before the system, if possible. And that's the way I would see it is each case.
I would say that the perception is based on a stereotype. And stereotypes, of course, are clumsy because people are individuals. However, stereotypes are usually based in something, right? I don't look over my shoulder when I'm at the geriatric home visiting my grandmother. I look over my shoulder when I'm in the dark parking lot on the wrong side of town. So there is a tendency, probably, for prosecutors to be a little tougher on crime, and defense attorneys to maybe be a little softer, but it's still highly individual. Me individually, I think that it's important to remember that while the prosecutor wears the white hat, it's easy to sort of affiliate yourself with, the good cause because I'm protecting society. And those arguments are very valid. But usually from the defense side, what you're hearing are about civil liberties and defense of the Bill of Rights and individual liberties as they're applied in the criminal context. Because ultimately, if we don't guarantee those rights to the bottom of our society, then maybe they don't apply to anybody else. And ultimately, that's what we fight for. And I think that judges have a culture in the chamber. They talk to each other. And you need to have people from both sides in order to have an intelligent and meaningful conversation.
And with that, since we did have 4 people this time, we're running a little bit over, so no one else has anything to say in the interview panel?
Of course I do.
Of course you do, Karen.
My name is Karen Steelman. I'm the Civilian Auxiliary Director for Veterans and Politics. And as I was mentioning to some of the other judges that were here, it gets really easy, human nature being what it is, to get comfortable in your position and forget that you're serving the people. So I would like each of you to give me a statement that's going to assure me that you're going to seek justice. Regardless of which one of you is sitting in the seat that you're running for, we only have one constitution and one set of laws. So tell me something that's going to assure me that you're going to seek justice no matter what is before you or who is before you, or if it's a friend of yours or if you're having a bad day and you cut somebody short and they didn't get to tell their whole story, and there is something in there that might have an effect on their case. And we'll start with Mr.
30
Hood.
seconds on these.
Okay. All right. And despite the many lawyer jokes out there, especially about integrity or the way we are, we all have an oath. And we all have an oath to abide by our ethical canons. If we were fortunate enough to become judge, obviously there are judicial canons in which we'd have to follow. These are things that I think all of us have going through law school and preparing ourselves to be lawyers. We take them very seriously. We follow the law. We follow our beliefs, obviously, but within those confines. And I think that's important. And I think that's something that I've at least shown through my experience that I've lived with.
I can tell you as a prosecutor, I have dismissed cases when I knew that I couldn't prove them. I can tell you that Metro calls district attorneys in order to approve search warrants, and I have denied search warrants. That is something that, needs to be done. It's, I am a prosecutor, I do wear a white hat, and I do take my job very seriously. It doesn't happen very often, but it's a decision that you have to make each and every time. So I can tell you that I've done it as a prosecutor, and I would continue to do it if I were elected.
The campaign slogan that I chose, which is on all my signs, is justice for all. As a supervisor in my office, sometimes I'll look at the big stack of files on my desk, and I have to take a step back and remind myself that those files, each one of those files represents somebody's life, and it's the only life that they have, whether it be a victim or a defendant or even a witness. Their story needs to be told, their position needs to be considered, but just keep in mind that each one of those files represents a person, and that's what I remind the attorneys that I train. We're messing with people's lives. We've got to be serious about it.
A man I respect a great deal once told me that if you weren't the man before you got the job, then you're not going to be the man after you got the job. Will said that to me, and I take it with me, even if it came from my opponent. My grandmother exacted a promise from me that I would be a decent and honest attorney, and she's carried it forward to being a judge. She didn't exact a promise me that I would be a judge for the rest of my life. You do the best job you can. Maybe they'll re-elect you. But if they don't, you go back to what you did well.
And with that, I'd like to say thank you for all of you for being on our panel today with Veterans in Politics. I'd like to thank our panel here, and we really appreciate the time that you gave us to answer our questions. Thank you very much.
Panel members.